Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Hi there, folks. Picard is a space show that's vaguely related to Star Trek, but has less and less to do with it as the time goes on. Hey, CBS Access.
Thanks, I hate it.
Episode 5, Star City Rag, starts off with not one but two flashbacks, the first of which is 13 years ago, to a creepy Borg chop shop lab where some wifey is literally pulling a Starfleet officer's eye right off and then trying to drill into his head, when 7 and 9 bursts in and makes her very much a dead person. And it turns out that guy is done for and begs her to end his suffering, so, she does that. After that, it's fast forward to a couple of weeks before the present day, on the fabled Freecloud. And there, the head baddie wifey called Vajazzle is told that Bruce Maddox has arrived. Yeah, the same Bruce Maddox they've been talking about all season. And she's like,
kill him.
But luckily she relents and has a wee chat with him. And it turns out that his robot lab has been completely melted away to nothing by the Tal Shiar. And he's not very happy, and she's not very happy. And then he's not very well because it turns out she poisoned him. And it turns out she's going to sell him off to the Romulans herself to make a bit of cash. There you go. Meanwhile, Picard and 7 and 9 are catching up, or maybe meeting up for the first time. It's not actually very clear. And it turns out she now works as a space ranger with guys called the Fenriers, and they're out protecting the good honest folk out here in the sticks. I mean, I wish I was kidding, but basically we can tell that she's a proper cynical jaded cowboy type, because she drinks her bourbon and she downs it hard. But since she's all about helping the little guy, she's willing to listen to Picard's plan, because, he's off to try and help someone in trouble. And then Raffi and the captain are gossiping about them while Professor Agnes is watching old movies of Maddox, presumably because now that they've actually hired an actor to play him, it's worth getting the best of the money out of it. And it turns out that the pair of them were more than just associates. But when they finally get to Freecloud, all the capitalist pop-ups start really to annoy them, and they find out that Maddox is going to be sold to Romulans. So they decide that actually, rather than staging some kind of breakout, they can actually go in and trade something for him, since 7 of 9 offers herself up.
I volunteer as tribute!
But I'm pretty sure she doesn't have any alternative hidden motives about that. None whatsoever. So of course, Captain Spanish puts on like Pimp of the Year gear, and he's going to pretend to be some kind of middleman, like a bodyguard sort of guy, while Picard is going to dress up and be this mad French broker. And in fact, everybody's pretended to be something they're not. A broker, a bodyguard, a captive, a good actor. Anyway, and Rios has to convince a giant lizard guy who can smell out lies.
I can smell a lie.
Which they make a big thing about, clearly, because they feel the need to tell the audience it twice in 2 minutes. But then luckily Agnes has like some kind of beat and blocker things that make him basically stoned, and not suspect in any way whatsoever. So yeah, the deal gets underway and they start to make the exchange, but it turns out it's all more complicated because 7 and Vajazzle have some kind of a history. I mean, not only apparently did they used to be a couple or something, but it was Vajazzle who was behind the Borg organ chop shop, and 7 has her by the throat in a flash, and everyone like chills the hell out and drops all the disguises and pretenses completely.
Are we still pretending?
No.
And then nobody does anything really until the lizard dude goes for a hidden gun about 5 minutes later, and Rio shoots him dead. And then Picard convinces 7 to let Vajazzle live, and they all beam back to the spaceship. And Maddox has to get whisked away to sickbay on account of being in really bad sorts. So 7 asks for like a couple of guns as payment, and Picard's like, yeah, sure, whatever, and says bye, because, she says her ship's there, and she beams off, and he's just like, yeah, whatever, doll, bye. And actually, no, she beamed back down to the planet, where she ends Vajazzle's bodyguards, and then they have like a big serious chat, and she kills her dead. And then she goes like on a guns akimbo rage against, well, presumably random security people who work there. Calm down, love. And back on the ship, Picard gets the scoop on the Borg cube from Maddox and sets off course with the captain. And then he checks in on Raffi, who, she'd been off visiting her son in a side plot that frankly wasn't even interesting enough for me to mention. And back in the sickbay, Maddox finally wakes up, and Agnes, she kills him dead, because apparently if he only knew what she knew, and because frankly she couldn't have been that much more obvious as a suspect loose cannon figure. But yeah, anyway, he's dead, R.I.P. Maddox and all that. So what did I think? Well, I mean, I've given the show the benefit of the doubt from the very beginning. I mean, you all know I wasn't the biggest fan of Discovery, but I refused to taint this with that brush. And I've actually been quite person standing up and saying that, no, let's give this show the time it needs. On here, on Twitter, and all over the place. I've been saying to my pals and stuff, no, let's give it a chance. It's not that bad. However, this week, after 2 pretty dull episodes and an awful lot of meandering, the show actually tried to move the plot forwards. And frankly, I'm basically pretty much offended by this episode in more or less every way. But, I've got my system. Let's stick to it. So we'll have the good before we talk about any of the bad stuff. So what was good? Well, it was genuinely nice to see Jerry Ryan as 7 of 9. I mean, Voyager isn't the best show, but she was one of the best characters in it, and she was really kind of believable in the way that she carried herself, and I didn't really have a great problem with her turning into like a bitter and hard person, especially if the story is that she spent the better part of the last decade stopping black marketeers from murdering and vivisecting ex-Borg people like her, especially while they're still alive. And I thought she was pretty good in this, because she is a good actress, even though the script was a bit naff. She did the best she probably could with it. And there was also the really briefest hint of a really fascinating moment between her and Picard. I mean, literally, it was maybe like 6 or 7 seconds long, but they were both talking about having been Borg. And that was what I realised I'd never actually known I'd wanted from this, from the pair of them meeting, and from this episode. And I didn't get it. I only got a hint of what could have been. So unless she shows up later on or in a different season, we'll maybe get more. But for the time being, yeah, that was a tiny little moment and a fragment of goodness. Also, I didn't actually hate the idea of the Freecloud place. I thought it was a kind of an inevitable sort of place that you would get in somewhere like this. I mean, Space Vegas, basically. It's not the most original idea, but it's kind of conceivable. And it wasn't anywhere near as bad as Canto Bight on Star Wars, so there you go. And it was also kind of nice that they finally brought back Maddox. And also the Borg guy at the start, Icheb. Now, Icheb was actually another ex-Borg guy who was on a few episodes of Voyager. He's a real character they brought back, and they've killed him off really horribly. And I don't think either of these guys was actually the original actor who played the roles. I mean, who knows why? It could be work conflicts, or something, or they didn't want to come back, or they just had somebody else better. But I appreciate that they bothered to bring the characters back. And I didn't actually have any problem with either of these actors' work. I thought they were fine with what they were doing. But Christ, really, honestly, that's as good as this gets. That's all I've got to say that's good about this. Now, I don't want to be unfair at all about this. So straight up from the beginning, I'll say, okay, this was done kind of like a heist episode. And that's not my favourite kind of thing. I don't mind it, but, I'm not going to be like going, well, hey, just because it's a heist. I'm not a big Ocean's 11 kind of guy or any of the other Ocean's movies. And I vaguely enjoyed Solo, but it was okay. But, the heist thing, take it or leave it. So just so you know, that part of this episode isn't going to do that much for me. But straight off the bat, this is the most gory, unpleasant stuff I've ever seen in Star Trek. Like in any Star Trek thing, episode or film. And it was really unnecessary. I mean, Icheb being literally vivisected is bad enough. And showing his Borgie eye being yanked out and cut off, even if it was plainly semi-mechanical, and the matter-of-fact way that the person did it, it was horrific. And I know it was supposed to be. It's not at all Star Trek-y. I mean, the worst we've ever really had on Star Trek was maybe a bit of implied horror, a little bit blood here and there, but stuff like, I mean, the transporter malfunction in the motion picture is probably the most horrendous thing that ever actually happened in it. And that wasn't really anything you saw. It was just the concept of it and then the sound that made it really horrible.
Oh no, they're forming.
Or that, I mean, there's that really laughable bit at the end of Conspiracy where they kind of melt a dude with phasers to get the giant worm that's living inside him. I mean, okay, fair enough. That was a bit silly, but I mean, compare how the same director did something similarly in Borgie in First Contact years ago and did it without any blood and gore and just the tiniest hint that something had happened. And that was during a nightmare sequence. But this felt kind of cheap. I mean, this almost felt kind of hateful in a way, and it didn't work the right way because it wasn't apparent exactly what was going on, and it didn't really tie up that this was that long ago. Because we didn't know it was Vijazla who was in charge of it until much later on, it seemed ridiculous. I mean, it took 12 years for 7 and 9 to finally get to Vijazil or Vagisil or Biagible or whatever the on earth her name was. I mean, what is it with the names in the show? We've got Daj and the Hatch Vash, and now we've got Vijazil or whatever. And as I was saying, it took her 12 years to find her. The person who runs Freecloud. I mean, she couldn't have just flown there and done exactly what she did. I mean, clearly it's not difficult for her to do. Because, I mean, here's the one thing is, we saw her palming the transporter relay thing, which they made such a big meal out of explaining, something which they've talked about in so many episodes of Star Trek. But fair enough, there might be people who've never seen Star Trek who wouldn't know what that was all about. So yeah, but that's to let her beam off the planet once she's already down. So I mean, I presume that's so she can escape after a kill rampage. But to be fair, I mean, okay, maybe it's not a kill rampage because she's firing blue shots, so maybe she's actually stunning these people, and the shots that she's fired at the other person were red. So okay, I'll accept she's not actually out murdering millions of people. But what bugged me is she literally says to Picard, yeah, my ship's here by now, and just beams away. And he's just like, yeah, whatever, and never checks. And clearly neither does the captain, because there's no logs or anything. Like, nobody actually even just looked on the thing and went, oh, she beamed back to the planet. That seems odd. But they don't really care about things like that on this show, because it's not difficult to do this stuff. Like, Agnes can do the beaming without any practice, even though, like, they've shown that's something that it takes a lot of skill to do. That's been a plot point in films and episodes. And it's kind of crazy because we've also got stuff like the emergency medical hologram guy plainly seeing Agnes murdering Maddox. But I'm guessing there won't be anything about that next week, despite the fact that, the whole of the Voyager show basically being about how an emergency medical hologram's more like a person than a machine, and it's not an idiot. And Rios has given his own like holograms personalities, so I think they're probably customized. So I think they're probably not just going to be that stupid. But I could be getting away from myself a wee bit, and because I don't know what's happening next week, my money's going to be they're not going to do it cleverly. I'm just saying. But we need to talk about Raffi. You see, Picard, he's the main character, but he's letting other people figure everything out, tell him what to do, talk down to him.
No shit out of luck, jail.
I mean, the way this show's written, you would assume that actually probably the major character on this is Raffi, that she's somebody important that we should know about. Because the narrative's trying to pretend that she's old pals and that Picard's always relied on her to come up with ideas. But that's not the character he's ever been. And the show hasn't really earned that. It's just parachuted her in. And it's parachuted her in really badly because all we know about her is they used to work together and she didn't even pay him the respect of actually calling him by his actual rank.
Something's off about this whole business, jail.
And we also know that she's some kind of drug-addicted conspiracy nut who wouldn't follow rules and got sacked. And yeah, what else do we know other than that? Very, very little. And the show plays up that she's in the right and he's acts guilty all the time of something like neglect.
It makes total sense that you're angry. I disappointed you.
But then after her narking at him and narking at him and being weird to her and him and being oddly nice to her.
I admire what you do out there with the Rangers.
Strange that. We then get a scene about her visiting her estranged son, who has a baby on the way but wants nothing to do with his mental mum, blabbering on about conspiracies and stuff and being an absolute basket case. And then she just sneaks back on the ship after her master plan and a great big plan, but not actually helping in any way. I'm supposed to like this character? Does anyone actually like this character? Honestly, are we supposed to like this character? And then we've got Agnes, the obvious nutcase. I mean, casting her, who played the Psycho ex-drummer from Scott Pilgrim, was kind of a giveaway, but then, all the suspicious saviour moment in the second episode and insistence on coming along, and then, the bit where the emergency medical psychiatrist thing keeps popping up because she's going a bit nuts, and then you see her actually malking Maddox at the end. I mean, if you hadn't been paying attention, you maybe wouldn't have figured that was coming, but everybody else, I'm pretty sure, knew that was on the way. And beyond that, we don't actually know anything about her. We're 5 episodes in, and all we know about her is she laughed inappropriately once. She doesn't like space because it's boring. She doesn't understand baking, and she never learned how to use a transporter, but then learned it in 5 minutes, and it's fine. Shut up, show. Honestly, this is terrible. And then Elrond the elf and his ever-changing accent and his bad acting. I mean, and he's supposed to be from a cult of assassins who never lie and always speak their minds, but he's playing it up like being a goofy idiot who doesn't understand anything, despite the fact he's been brought up on a diet of some kind of Romulan cult and Alexandre Dumas, and yet he still just acts like an imbecile. But the old nuns didn't act like imbeciles, so why does he? I mean, no, just no, again. And the editing's worse than ever this week. Conversations jumping suddenly all over the place, scenes just rammed together, the dialogue's terrible, especially when they need to repeat things over and over again. I mean, they also edited part of this again non-chronologically. They've done that a few times this season. And then they have different characters saying exactly the same things, only seconds apart because of the way it's edited. I mean, it's just bad. And for an episode that starts out with serious, horrific gore, and is supposed to be, serious, and we're supposed to take it serious and emotional at the end, it goes full RuPaul with the costumes and has them parading about in a club that feels like Las Vegas met the place from Tron Legacy. And the costumes are really stupid. I mean, not that Trek hasn't had daft costume design, it really has over the years, but what's Rios doing in this Pimp of the Year costume? And why is Picard some kind of weird French art house pirate guy? It seems a bit weird. It's surprising that on this show, the guys are all dressed up funny and act like morons and get told off constantly, and the women are either badass, stoic, or starky, or complete psychos. No, it's not surprising at all. I mean, I don't like playing this card because it's usually bullshit that gets used by dafties on the internet pulling this stuff up. But seriously, it's literally become impossible to ignore that this show is constantly full of guys being talked down to by the female characters and smacked about and lectured, and constantly the women are shown to be really smart and the guys they never offer anything in return. They just do as they're told, or they get chastened and they're quiet. I mean, Critical Drinker, who's a really good channel, you should check him out, he actually mentioned that in his episode 4 review, and it really struck a chord with me, and I have to agree, but it's reached the point where it's just become ridiculous now.
Are you spotting a theme with the male characters in this show? Anyway, whatever.
Star Trek Picard started interesting but slow, and then it dragged its heels for about 3 episodes, and now it's descending into absolute schlock. The kind of schlock that's not even worthy of a bad episode of Blake 7 or Buck Rogers. I mean, honestly, I don't know how they plan to go from here on, but it's bloody horrible as it is. And in some ways it's getting worse than Discovery, because at least STD knew that it was a good idea to make each episode stand alone in its misery, rather than dragging out the agony for like 4 or 5 episodes. Honestly, I haven't felt this let down about a show in a long time, and I watch a lot of TV. So sadly, till next week, I've been Ian, and these truly have been my grumpy opinions.